Good morning.
Good morning.
We welcome back our neighbor and now one of our favorite authors. If not a favorite, I love it. We're thankful you're here, Kalia, in the weather and in the winter, and that you would take your time to be with us, to share your life. So let us pray. Oh Lord, we do give you thanks for the life you call us to share. We give you thanks for safe travels on blustery days. We give you thanks that the net that you cast is bigger than we can imagine, and that the community you have called us to share life with would be so varied. We give you thanks, O Lord, especially this morning for our time with Kalia, for the gift of her language, for the gift of her culture, and the gift of her time, that we could learn about our Hmong neighbors in ways that we had known, and that we would see you in each other. All this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Kalia's sister is here setting up to sell books, so afterwards there are books for sale for all of you.
Thank you, Kalia.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? This is so much better. I really appreciate microphones. Last week, I promised a little girl that if she was going to come today, I was going to read from my children's book. I don't think I'm going to share it with all of you. This is my debut children's book. It's the first of 8 entirely different manuscripts that I have sold already. This one will be out on October 1st. And we'll have a launch, actually, at the Minnesota Children's Museum. So if any of you have children, if you're interested, keep your eyes out. It's going to be exciting. This will be the first book that they've ever launched, because it will be the first Hmong-authored book about Hmong children, child to come out from Lutheran America. So it's inspired by my neighbor, Bob, who loved a woman named Ruth, his wife, for over 60 years. When we moved into our house, Ruth died, and so Bob sat outside watching my little babies. And every season, Bob would say, I'm not going to see them walk. And then they're walking. He said, I'm not going to see them run. They're running. And he said, I'm not going to see them find the trails behind the garage. But I have a feeling that Bob holds on this summer, that action is coming. And Bob is very sad that Ruth cannot see this book into being. He hopes that he will. So the first copy off the press, I'm running over across the street. So Bob, too, is a neighbor. It's called, this is the most beautiful thing. The one I want to read from is called Map into the World. But I have currently so many books.
What a wonderful problem to have.
It is. And I'm old enough to understand that the flood of language isn't always going to come. There will be seasons of drought. Right now I'm surrounded by the little ones, so there's inspiration everywhere. I have identical twin boys who are 3 and a little girl who's 5. And so inspiration is all around us. But I understand that different seasons will come. Tops of the Trees is another one. But this is the one I want to read from. And I hate reading from my phone. I hate it when there's so I can already see the illustrations. You all can't, but I can.
Do we have someone handy here who can hook it up to our projector?
Not that handy.
So the book is dedicated to Bob, for Bob who loves me. The first time we saw the swing and the slide in the garden of the greenhouse with the big windows, my mother sat down in a chair in the backyard and said she did not want to get up. That I and I looked at the garden, and she pointed out tomatoes, green beans, and a watermelon round as my mother's belly. That I knelt down to touch the dirt. I asked my mother if I could try the swing, and she said, yes, but no. The greenhouse became our house. I helped that Bai hang the special story cloth about how the Hmong got to America on the empty wall by the big window of the living room. We saw an old man and an old woman through the windows. They waved. We waved back. Later, my mother and father brought me across the street. The old man's name was Bob, and the old woman's name was Ruth. Up close, I could see that they were even older than I. When the baby boys were being born at the hospital, I took care of me at home. We were in the garden picking tomatoes and beans and checking on the watermelon when my parents came back with the boys. I ran to the gate. The boys were smaller than my baby dolls, but cuter than any doll with their fuzzy heads and red lips and round brown eyes. Some days the babies cried very loud. I covered my ears with my hands and asked my father to take me outside. Bob and Ruth sat on their special bench, and we waved back and forth. The leaves of the two ginkgo trees by Bob and Ruth's house turned yellow like apricots. One day a brisk wind blew and the fan-shaped leaves came flying down. They covered the grass and the street and the dark mouth of the train. Bob raked while Ruth sat and watched. I brought in a leaf for the baby boys to touch, but my mother said, "They're still too little, Papa." The snow made the world quiet around us. We stopped seeing Bob and Ruth outside. The snowflakes fell on their driveway and glittered in the gray light. I made a ball of snow for my brothers, but it melted before they woke up from their naps. At night, I looked out the big windows at Bob and Ruth's house to see their lights shining across the dark street. Sometimes, I saw a shape of a person looking back at me. I waved, but the shadow person never waved back. On a cold morning, cars came to our block, filling the streets. Car doors slammed as men and women in thick jackets walked quickly to Bob and Ruth's house. My father said, "Ruth has died. Her family is coming to say goodbye." I felt sad for Ruth. My brothers just played with the toys above them. The cars kept coming and going, and the next day and the next. I swayed back and forth on my toes by the big windows. I tried to lift up one of my baby brothers so that to the window so that people could see how cute he was. But he cried, and my mother said, "You're still too little to carry him, Paul." After the long New Year, my baby brothers learned how to sit on their own, and we all sat out looking at the window. I clapped for them when a plane flew across the high skies. They laughed every time. The house across the street was empty. The ginkgo trees reached for the sky with their thin fingers. When the snow started melting, I could not wait to return to the swing and the slide and the garden. My baby brothers crawled all over the floor, underneath the tables and the chairs. They were like puppies, their tongues licking everything. I found the first morn of spring on our driveway, and I named her Annette. I wanted to bring her inside so my brothers could watch her wiggle, but my mother said, "I don't think so, Pambao." The world became green again, and finally we all went outside. The I planted green onions. I picked flowers from the lilac bushes for my brothers to smell. They opened their mouths and tried to eat them. My mother said, "Don't let them eat the flowers, Pambao." Bob's garage door opened, and we all watched as he pushed out his special bench. He sat down alone. I pulled on my mother's sleeve until she looked at me. I whispered an idea in her ear. My mother and I crossed the street and walked over to Bob. I let the sidewalk chalk bucket swing in my hands the whole time. I asked my mother to ask Bob if I could draw on his driveway. I said if he doesn't like it, the rain will wash it away. Bob nodded and said, "Go ahead." My mother and Bob talked in low voices. I could hear Bob say, "Ruth, she was with me for 60 years. I started a picture with a teardrop. And then I made it splatter like sunshine. I drew lines leading away from the splattered sun in many directions. I drew a line that led to the garden, there I put a yellow ginkgo leaf. I drew a line that led to the grass, there I made sparkling snow. I drew a line to the sidewalk, there I put a smiling worm named Annette. I drew an arrow to our house, there I added lilac flowers. And then I drew a line, the biggest line of all, toward the street, and there I drew the whole world. When I was done, I walked quietly to my mother and to Bob. He stopped talking, and Bob shook my hand. "What did you draw for me?" he asked. I said in a whisper, "A map into the world, just in case you need it." And I walk on so you can see the final image because I think it's a beautiful spread. But this is the final art.
Oh.
Who's the illustrator?
This very talented illustrator, custom.
Thank you.
The book is, of course, about how a young girl discovers the different seasons of life and how she also discovers the seasons of the world around her. And it's very much inspired by a true story. Bob had stopped leading the driveway, and so the kids wanted to go and draw him a map into the world, just in case he's forgotten the way out.
Hope it went dark.
Oh, in the dark. There you go.
So did you have input on your illustrator?
Very little, and I like it that way, and I'll explain why. Because the art inspires art. I've seen the Latehomecomer become a choral composition. I've seen it become a rap song. I've seen it become a performative dance piece in McAllister College. You know, so when I thought of a children's book, I wanted to create the kinds of books that I hungered for as a child. The books that I think still yet exist in the world that we belong to. A book that literary publishing called Quiet. The way it works is you don't choose your illustrators if you go with the bigger publishers. They'll give you like 5 of their top choices. And these are people whose art they've been following for years and they really want to see. Because it takes a kind of fortitude to finish a children's book. Most children's books are 32-page spreads. And you have to be able to zoom in and out, you know, give all kinds of perspectives. And so there was a writer named Sue Kim, and I liked her art anyway, but it turned out that her husband was also named Aaron. My husband's named Aaron. So I'm like, we have something in common. I choose her. You know, I know her work from a Cartoon Network show that she does. But here, I think she's doing much more natural elements. It's very sweeping. This is her first American debut. So she's big in Canada. She's big in Korea, but this is her American debut. Although she's a professor of art right here down south. So it's really an awesome thing. The book allows me, the children's book allows me a much more tighter frame. You know, when you write a poem, you have a few lines. When you write books like I do, like the Song Poet or the Latehomecomer, you know, those books come from thousands of pages written. You have a lot of room to do the work that you want to do, which means there's also more room for mistakes. But the board can afford mistakes because it's bigger, you know? It's like when you go into a whole country versus we put you into a room. And so the training, I really like the space and the thinking that happens. And so that was my first book. I worked with Carol Hins. I said at a public library talk, I would like to do children's books. And after that, 2 different editors from 2 presses wrote me. And they're like, would you like to meet? And I'm like, sure. And so I wrote these things and we worked on them. And I've learned a great deal. The second book will be coming from the University of Minnesota Press. And theirs is really exciting. It's called If You Give a Boy Room. I don't know if you all remember, but 2 summers ago, on the first day that the Lake Elmo pool was open, a small girl drowned and died. That little girl belonged to my friend. She said that when she grew up, she wanted to be a writer like me. And so she died. You know, I have a little girl too. The news was very devastating. I went to her funeral and I was incredibly broken with her parents. Because the coffin was so small that her father sat up there holding the coffin. Something I'd never seen before. And so in the days after, I followed her mother through her grieving process, her Facebook friends. One day her mother said, this is 6 months after the child's death. We just had that really warm, abnormally warm day, and then this huge snowstorm came, and the whole of the east side was covered in this blanket of white, this quietness. And the mother said on that day on Facebook, she said, I asked, her older brother's name is Mia, I asked him if he wanted a room of his own. And of course, they live in an old house, an old 3-bedroom. Old houses, as we all know, don't grow new rooms easily. And so the boy says, yes. Whose? And the mother said, your sister's. And he said, oh, where am I going to sleep on? And the mother said, your sister's bed. And he said, oh, where am I going to put my clothes? And she said, your sister's drawers. And for the first time, because he hadn't expressed a response, he said, can I just have my sister back? Of course, the writer's heart in me, the mother's heart in me broke. And I started looking. There's very little written for children about children who die. Of course, in America and across the world, every year, millions of children die, leaving their siblings behind. And so the book is called If You Give a Boy a Room. And of course, I know you all know the series, if you give a pig a pancake, if you give a mouse, a cookie. So it plays off of that, but it's about a much heavier subject. Because I think it's incredibly beautifully written, and it will be fantastically drawn. We will debut into the world, the first Hmong illustrator. Because I know we have artists, but they haven't had the opportunities. And so as a Hmong writer, I like to provide some of those opportunities, particularly because Hmong children comprise the biggest population in the St. Paul Public Schools. I don't know if you know that, but we're the biggest population. And so that's the second one. And then I find there's more and more books that I wanted in the world. And so there are more and more books coming out. It was a fruitful year. The other book that the other manuscript that I'm going to be from is also from a book that will be out this fall. It's called Somewhere in the Unknown World. It comes from a Lucille Clifton poem about an old woman weaving, and the scientists doing their chemistry, and about the world firing away. Minnesota is now well known for immigrants. We're now well known nationally for conversations about refugees, but we have more refugees per capita than any other state in the nation. We're home to, of course, Catholic Charities, Lutheran Social Services, and a lot of churches, very similarly to this one, sponsored those very first refugees. So now we have the biggest Hmong concentration in the nation, the biggest Tibetan concentration in the world, the biggest Somali concentration, not in the world, in the country, pardon me. So we have these, and this is just the beginning. We have a long list of them. And so I thought, it's about time we have that conversation right here. And this book started out as one single story. An old Hmong man said to me, who I love dearly, do you think I'm a good man? And I said, I think you're wonderful. And he said, I'm not good enough. And I said, why would you say that? And he said, I'm going to tell you a story, and I want you to write it down. I want you to write it down so the world knows who I am before I die. And I said, that's strange, but okay. And so he told me a story about how when they crossed the Mekong River, he had his wife had their newborn daughter, he had 4 of his sons, and he had this tiny little raft, and he was blowing the raft to cross the river in the dark of night. And he said there was a full moon the night of the crossing, and he could see that there were there was a little girl with another one on her back, and they were walking down these family groups, asking. He knew what they were going to ask for. And so he was trying to move as fast as possible. But he couldn't move fast enough because the baby was crying. So these 2 sisters approached him. The older one, he said, was about 7. The younger one was 4, much older than he had realized, but she was weak. So she was lying against her sister's back looking up. And the older sister had this pot, and she handed it to him. And he looked, and he said that the pot had a little bit of rice on the bottom. And she said, our parents died in the jungle 3 weeks ago. I've been trying to take her to this river. All I have left is this bit of rice and this pot. I'll give you everything I have. All you have to do is take her across. You don't have to take me. Give her a chance. And he said he looked at his wife. His wife looked away, and she couldn't look because 3 months before that, they had a 3-year-old daughter who had died. There had been heavy rains in the jungle. There was a flooded creek. And when they woke up, the little girl was floating down the river. After trying to call out, she was dead. And his wife couldn't look at these girls, and so he told them, no, a better man will come along. You go and you ask him. I can't do that. You see how small my raft is. And she said, she hardly weighs anything. Just take her. Take this rice. And then the girl went to her knees. And he said, his children were looking at him with big eyes. And he looked at her in the moonlight, and he told her, I'll come back for you both. I'm going to take them across, and then I'm going to swim back, and I'm going to take you both across. And he said he believed the words that he said to her. She sank down by the river's edge, and she just waited. He got his family on this raft, and he swam, and he pulled them. And he said at the halfway point, he looked back in the light of the full moon. She was still on her knees, and he knew that he was not going to return. The river was too wide. And then he said he could hear the gunshots. And he turned away. And as life would happen in Thailand, his mother, his wife, a few years later gave birth to another little girl. So all of his life, he's watched these two sisters loving each other. And every time he looks at his own, he sees these two others, who he said also belong to him. And he says that he's getting old, and now, more than ever before he sleeps, all he can see are their eyes staring at him in the moonlight. He's going to meet them again. While he prayed in his heart that a better man than himself would come along, he knows he's going to see them again as he crosses that river bank home. So he wanted me to write that one story, and I wrote it. And I didn't know what you do with a story, a single story, and so I sent it to my editor, and I said, Riva, somebody I love very much has asked me to write a story, and I've written it. And he wants the world to know that he's not been a good man. I believe otherwise, but he wants the world to know. Is there somewhere we can publish this? And my editor said, no, this one story doesn't make a book. But if you were up for the task, maybe you can write many stories. And I said, okay, I will. I live in Minnesota. We have refugees from wars across time here. But the wars of the last 50 years have brought in a lot of refugees. And so I sought out not only to tell this one man's story, but all these other refugee stories. In the end, it was people I met. It was the crime man I met at the multicultural fair for our children's school. It was the scheduling clerk at the hospital or HCMC where I took my children to see their pediatrician. You know, it was an Uber driver. It was all of these everyday people that we see on the streets. And I talked to them, and I asked them for their permission. And I told their stories as authentically as I can, as I knew how. And so this book is going to come out also in the fall. I'm going to read one story from it. How many of you know what Nautilus Counseling clinic is?
Say that again?
Nautilus. It's a big counseling center. If you go on University in Denali, there's this big green building.
Yeah.
Okay? Inside that green building, there's this counseling psychological services center called Nautilus. It sounds like a planet, and it is a planet when you enter. It's full of refugees suffering from PTSD and depression and other ills. And this is one of those stories about one of the women who goes to Nautilus. So Nautilus, same old tired world. The woman laid on the sofa, her head on his leathery arm, her cell phone in her hand. She put on weight. With each breath she took, her stomach rose, and a soft mound of flesh beneath the polyester shirt she wore rose. She needed a haircut. Her black hair kept short had grown long, its strands covering most of her eyes like a teenage boy's. Her hair hadn't been this greasy since the day she worked the night shift and then spent the days caring for her own children. The time she could have used then to wash her hair, she used to sleep instead. She looked sluggish, sagging flesh and clothing sitting on the sofa, her iPhone in her hands. The woman spent all of her time looking for flowers on the internet. She knew how to find and save the photos, flowers everywhere, from around the world, tulips from Holland, orchids of Thailand, the beautiful Buddhist lotus palms from Laos, the purple heathers abloom on the English moors. Once she saved the photos, she spent hours editing them, changing the filters and cropping the images. She had over 11,000 pictures of flowers on her phone. Sometimes she was afraid. She saw black things move across the living room floor, the size of cats. Her eyes frantic, she made no sound. Instead, she froze in place. The only movement her eyes were her eyes helplessly searching for an exit from her body. She had vivid dreams full of handsome men who came into her life on horses. They all wanted to marry her and to take her away. In the dreams, she wanted to go with them, except she couldn't quite lift herself off the ground and onto their high horses. Her body was heavy in the dream, anchored firmly to the earth. Sometimes she woke up reaching for the handsome men, only to find empty, lonely air of their absence. She couldn't sleep at night without her drugs. Even with them, in the day she was tired, drowsy, had no heart for anything or anyone. Sometimes she cried for her dead father. It had been nearly half a century since his death, but to her it was fresh as the morning. She believed she knew where he was, always at the edge of the horizon. There he waited for her with wings like birds. He sent messages to her. He offered a promise to lift her up high so that they could soar through the skies together. From there, he told her she wouldn't have to miss her kids because she could still see them on Earth. Most of the time, though, she spent her days on the sofa looking at her phone. She did not have the energy to cook or clean, two things she'd always attended to as a matter of life and death for her children. In the past, no matter how little sleep she was functioning on, she made traditional meals with no store-bought sauces and little fat for her family. She boiled fish with lemongrass, tomatoes, green onions, culantro, mint, basil, red-hot chili peppers, cilantro, a touch of MSG, and then salt to taste. She made bowls of rice, tofu, and chicken soup. Her children loved her mung bean thread soup with minced pork and green onions and cilantro, black pepper galore. As they ate, she stood at the sink, waiting to wash each plate, bowl, spoon, and fork. Now she herself was never hungry, and her children's hunger held no power to get her up. All her life, no matter where they were, in the refugee camps and housing projects of Minnesota, she and her husband's bedroom was a place where the bed was always made. The floor clean, a space where clothes were folded and bound in closets stored in drawers. No matter the mess beyond its doors, the chaos of the unsteady world was never allowed to enter her. Now she placed a blanket on the floor. The mountain of clean clothes that needed to be folded and put away was nearly as high as their rumpled bed. Now the dust of their lives had entered and settled over her body and grown so thick that she could barely move. Her husband, too used to the woman from the past, perhaps hoping that she would return in light of the current conditions of their room, did not pull the covers over the sheets in the mornings or sit to fold the clothes, so the pile grew higher and higher by the day. At the doctor's office, the nurses gave her evaluations, worksheets for her to circle her emotions on, how strong they were, how much pain she was in. On the question of pain, it was always physical, never otherwise. Each time she said the same, the doctor increased the dosage of her prescriptions. When one prescription did not work, the doctor shifted to another. The woman was put on Wellbutrin, Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, Effexor, Cymbalta, and more. One pill made her believe that she was on the cusp of death. Her heart would start racing. She grew short of breath. She spoke her death wishes. Just think simple at the funeral. I don't want anything fancy. Follow the most rudimentary details of tradition. At the doctor's office, on the question of suicide, she shook her head adamantly and said, "My biggest fear is that I'll die and leave my children behind. I would never kill myself." She wept. The doctor asked why she was so sad. The woman answered, "I don't know what to do with myself. I'm out of work. I'm too young to be useless. My children need a mother who can take care of them." The doctor wanted her to go into the world. Yes, she could no longer find a job with her shoulder being so bad, her disability documented, but perhaps she could volunteer in a community organization. The woman couldn't drive. She couldn't speak good enough English. Her hands hurt, her feet hurt, her neck hurt. She was falling apart. The doctor said that she could not change the conditions of the woman's life, that the only thing she could do was change the conditions of her head. No one knew what to do with her heart. Her fiery heart, the heart of the little girl, the only one in her village to go to school, to race in front of the boys in the classroom. The heart of the young woman who chose love in a war full of death and despair, made a call to build a life from a world falling apart. The heart of the mother who had placed each of her children, alive and dead, before herself with no misgivings or regret. The heart of a wife who did everything hard so that her husband, in a world that had given up on him, could not give up on her, thus their lives together. Now her heart was hurt. The pills made the woman so tired she could not fret about going into the world. They numbed her body so she could not feel the pain in her hands, her feet, her neck. They glued her together in a bubble of despair. The doctor could not change the conditions of the woman's life, but she made it so that the woman could not interact with them. Each day the woman floated further and further away, all by herself, in a bubble full of flowery images, framed and filtered. One day the bubble rose high, a brisk wind blew, and it lifted far into the clouds of another world. The woman became a shiny particle in the wide openness of everything. This was, of course, only her fondest fancy. Thank you. That's from A Map into the World. And then I have another book that is very, very sad, and it's very, very beautiful, and very, very powerful and heartbreaking. It is called What God Is Honored Here. And it is a collection of women of color and indigenous women writing about miscarriage and loss. I don't know if you all know, but in this country, more indigenous women and more women of color suffer from miscarriage and infant loss than any other group of women. But there is nothing literally written by or for them. So at 19 weeks, I was pregnant. It was my first pregnancy. My husband and I were super, super excited. The baby's been doing well, you know. At 18 weeks, we'd gone and we listened to the baby's heartbeat. And then we got this, and then we went up to Anchorage, Alaska, to visit my sister-in-law and her family. And while there, we wanted to see the tallest mountain peak in North America, Denali. So we were like, we're going to go. We drove there and climbed this tiny little mountain. And I was telling my baby to breathe in the air with me. So I was taking these deep breaths. And then I felt like this kick, and my first ever real kick. And I put my hand to my belly and I told Aaron, look. And he looked, he could see nothing. But I felt everything shaking and shattering. We came home and it was a Monday morning. We went to our ultrasound at HCMC. We went, oh my God, it was really early in the morning, 8 a.m. So the ramp was empty. We'd never been able to park on the second floor before. Well, like, this is great. And I remember holding hands with him that day. And although my belly was pretty big in front of me, I was skipping a little. You know, we were walking past the nurse, and the nurse saw that I was like a child, and I was with my dad. Because from the back, I still looked like such a girl. You know, in my flower dress, skipping along. When she turned me, it was like a bad surprise, too. But it was beautiful. You know, the sun was shining and everything. We got to the ultrasound room, and I settled on the bed in the gown. The technician came, this woman, very soft-spoken, you know. She put gel on my belly, and then they turned on the monitors. And we saw this little baby curved toward the heart of me. And the baby wasn't moving. I've been in a lot of ultrasounds because I have a lot of younger siblings, and I've gone many times to interpret for my mother. And I know that you can hear a heartbeat, but that day I didn't know. That day I thought that the monitor was off, the volume was off. And so I saw the baby, and I kept trying to wake the baby up. Because it was a big gender reveal, right? And because I just wanted the baby to move. And I kept on moving, and the technician said, are you sure your baby is 19 weeks? And I said, yes. Just last week, we heard on the baby's heart. And the technician said, excuse me, and she left the room. And my husband sat there holding my hand, trying to wake up the baby with me. We're now both trying to wake up the baby. And then the doctors come in, and the younger one puts her hand on my foot. It squeezes. And the older one says, your baby is dead. And I'm thinking, I don't understand English. I'm thinking, this isn't true. And I said, no, we just heard the heartbeat 10 days ago. And she goes to the monitor, and she looks, and she says, your baby is dead. I'm so sorry. And all I can hear is my husband crying. But I'm sitting there, I'm not crying yet, you know. I'm still trying to wake the baby up. I tried for a whole hour. And then I knew that we had options, right? By the time a baby is 19 weeks, if the baby had made it to 20 weeks, medically it would have been classified as a miscarriage. But because the baby is 19 weeks, technically, If the baby had made it to 20 weeks, it would have been considered an infant death. But the baby was 19 weeks, so it was considered medically a miscarriage. And the baby was by then so sick that I had to deliver the baby. There was no magic pill that I could take, nothing that could be done. So they put me in labor and delivery, and they told me I was very tiny and it would all go by very fast. I could have as much of anything as I wanted. Everybody was very nice to me, and I wanted nothing. Isn't life ironic? Generally, I'd have all kinds of ideas, but I wanted nothing. And that night, the baby just would come out, no matter how much medication they were putting into me, there was just no contraction. My body was holding on so tight. And then at some point, they're like, "You're so tiny, we can't give you any more." And my husband, every time he'd hear a mother scream in pain, and then the corresponding cry of her child being born, he would stop. He would just cry. My mother, who had seven living babies and seven miscarriages, sat there beside me, holding my hand. My mother said, "The baby is going to be beautiful. There's nothing to be afraid of." And I told her, "I don't want to see, because if I see this, my whole life is never going to be the same again. I'm going to love someone I would never get to live with, Mom." But I had like this long goodbye that was just drumming in my head, you know? And so I'm like, "Aaron, when the baby is born, you're going to have to say all of this." And he was like, "I can't say anything." And so morning came, and I went to I'm a shaman. I grew up, my grandmas were a shaman. I belong to 3 shamans. We practice, we believe in animism. But we go, I'm standing by this doorway, because the baby's not coming out. And there's a church out of the HCMC. And there's a photo of Christ, but he's leaning down. And I'm looking at this image. And my mother-in-law, as I said last week, is a Lutheran minister. And she's sitting there, her head down, her Bible in her hand. And Aaron says to me, "You have to let the baby go. You have to let the baby go." And I felt this wash come over me. My whole body, it was just water flowing. And the baby flowed out of me. And I wasn't going to look. But of course you cannot look. And I looked, and the baby looked just like me. He looked just like me, except he was translucent. And his mouth was open like a hungry little bird. And I knew he'd always be hungry in some sense. I carried him, and he was lighter than anything I could have imagined. Lighter than a flower, lighter than a bubble, lighter than a flower petal. We named him Baby Jules. And my mother-in-law said, "Can I say a prayer to lead him?" And I said, "Yes." And she did. And we had this memory box. They gave us this memory box. And this memory box was illegally buried on that little island in Lake Phelan, because we were married at Lake Phelan, because we live close to Lake Phelan now. So there's like this piece of my heart there. And then I got pregnant again near my birthday, and I thought that I was just tired, but I got pregnant again. And in August, when I was going to deliver my baby, one of my good friends, Shannon Gibney, who's another very talented Minnesota author, she's African American, she'd gone in too, she was pregnant too, She went in the day before me, and the day that they were going to induce Xinyan, because everybody's worried by this time. The baby's not here, she's over 40 weeks. Anyway, Shannon Gibney posted on Facebook a picture of her baby, her daughter, her stillbirth. And so Shannon and I, in the wake of my live baby girl, we talked about how one day we would put together this collection, because we were both scouring the shelves. We are both literary writers. We love literature, We want to see, feel, again, through another's eyes, what we lived through. Because there is in the human experience, when you're going through something like that, there are feelings that are lost. And we didn't want to lose anything because we lost so much. We both looked for 3 years and we found nothing literary written by it before. And so, of course, then we were doing all these studies and talking to all these doctors who were doing all these tests to see if there was anything wrong. And they said, "No, we don't know. Most miscarriages in stillbirth, we have no explanations for, no medical explanations for. We like to say that it might be chromosomal, some kind of answer for a parent, but we have no responses in your case." And so, it took us many years. After I gave birth to the twins, I knew I was done. Shannon gave birth to a little girl, but she knew she was done. Well, we knew that our stories of becoming, at least carrying babies, was done. We were both finally ready to put together this collection. And when we put out the call, we got so many from around from around the country, around the world, and then we said we had to focus on America, because this is fairly, in some ways, a very distinct American problem, that there are these disparities in miscarriage and infant loss rates. And so we focused on American women from across the spectrum, and this book called What God Has Honored Here is going to come out in the fall from the University of Minnesota Press again, from a wonderful guy called Eric Anderson, whose wife has also suffered, and they've also gone through miscarriage. And so he's very sensitive, and it's very, I think it's the most powerful collection I've ever read. And this is not because I edited it, it's because I've read so many different collections, you know. I do medical interpreting, where I trained as a medical interpreter when I was first becoming a writer, and they say it is an honor to be in the midst of human suffering. It is an honor. And so the book is a thing that all of these women have delivered. It's live. It's live. It's going to start breathing in October, and we want to make sure that it walks, that it runs, and that it flies. And so that is just some of what I'm doing, what I have done. It's not what I'm doing right now. Right now I'm working on 6 different books, you know. So I'm always thinking, because I have, maybe because I've gone through all of that in the last 5 years, that I live in the flood of language. There's so much emotion, so many words said and unsaid that I long to hear, and to hear again and again and again. But I'm here for you all, and I want to make sure that we do a little bit of time to talk to me. And so, yes, 15 minutes. You can ask me anything, and I'll answer. Yes?
In our Lutheran teaching, we define a neighbor as anyone who is in need. And last spring, we had a very bad tragedy happen just across the street from our church. A Hmong family lost their little boy. When the parents were moving their cars around, they wanted to make sure.
I read it in the news.
It happened just across the street, and I know that all of us felt very powerless to reach out to that family. Now they had a big support net with their family, and I don't think any of us felt like we could go there and tell them how sorry we were for their loss. So that's, that would kind of fit in with this cultural difference that we run into sometimes. How we reach out to them, we don't really know. We were really powerless to do anything.
You know, I think that oftentimes we don't know what to do because we think it's so different. But after I left the baby, there were a lot of people who didn't know how to respond. But one day I came home and there was just a bouquet of flowers at my door. It was autumn. All of my own flower pots had died and wept over because I had long stopped watering them. But there was a bouquet of flowers at my door. Somehow it made it easier to breathe that day. You know? After Shannon lost her baby, I didn't know what to say or do because I had this live baby in my arms, you know. But there's Sword Co-op. We were living near the Sword Co-op then because my husband was doing his PhD at the University of Minnesota. They have these beautiful, overly expensive pies, but they're delicious. And so I bought a strawberry rhubarb pie and I left it at her door. And it took her a year and a half, and she wrote me and she said, that pie saved me that day. I think that's the thing about suffering. Sometimes it's not what you say. Sometimes it's not even what you do to someone. Sometimes it's just what you do for them. You know? And then there were so many other people who said to me, what can I do? And there was nothing they could do. You know? I remember going to my mom and dad's house, 19 weeks, and the baby had died. We were kind of returning. But I sat down to use the bathroom, and I felt wet in my leg, and I looked down, and it was because the milk was flowing, And I sat on the toilet for a long time. And when I opened the toilet door, my mom was standing there. I don't know how long she'd been standing there. But she was standing there. And she just squeezed my hand. And that was not Aaron, not my father, not my sisters, not my brothers could have done that. And it would have In that moment, that's the only thing that I needed, you know? But in everybody's life, there's a moment at which we ask what God is honored here. What is going on? Where do we stand? Why are we here, you know? The only thing that keeps so many of us going is that gesture of love. So do not feel there's nothing to do, ever, when someone is hurting. Kindness, care, these things, away from words, away from a face and a form, it's always a gift. Anybody else? Yeah?
No, Kalia is what we call you.
Yes.
What was your mom name and what did it mean?
That's a good question. My name is Kalia, but it's said this way. It's Kao Kalia Yang. When I was born, my grandma, who was a shaman, a medicine woman, a healer, delivered me to the world. And when she helped me, I was born at 3 a.m. in the morning. In the light of the kerosene lamp, she saw that I was crying, that there was a dimple already in my cheek. And so she said, this one is the song of the dimple. You know? Go is a song, it's feminine. Girl, the dimple, the song, the dimple. And my grandma said, that's what I'm going to name her. You know, my parents have always said I was a gift in a time when they did not dare dream of presents. You know, so my grandma gave me this really happy name. And my mom, when I was growing up, I wore the tiny little bell. And so whenever I was going anywhere, anybody in my family would hear me. And they were waiting with laughter and love. So I was like this very well-loved child. So my name is Kalia. It is the same name. In the St. Paul Public Schools, I became Kao Yang for a long time because Kao Kalia Yang is so long. When you're a selective means you don't speak, you want the shortest version possible. Right. You know, and then it made sense because I was in math class and the teacher said the shortest distance between any 2 points is a straight line. So I'm like, let's make it short. I'm an American. So for a long time I was Kao Yang, but when my first book was going to come out, I was ready to finally claim all of me. So I am Kao Kalia Yang. My husband calls me Kalia. He says it okay. Okay. I remember when he first met me, he was trying to learn Hmong from music videos on YouTube. Can't wait to learn Hmong. But there's all these love songs like I want to know what's in your heart. And my husband met my brother the first meeting, and he said, which is I fart on your heart. And my brother said, excuse me? And Aaron repeated it louder. And then Sue laughed because Sue realized it was the tones that are off. But yeah. No, I love my name. It's a strange thing to say. I love my name. The way I love my ears. You know, when we came here as permanent residential aliens, and when you used to have your alien card, it wasn't a picture of your face, it was a picture of your ears. I have splendid ears, people. They're beautiful. I can be an ear model and model hearing aids and earrings and all kinds of stuff, you know? Like near perfect ears. So I've always had this appreciation of ears, and I would never have noticed it if not for the alien card. But when you're just staring at an ear, you really get time to evaluate, you know? And then I started looking at other people's ears, but I remember when I was going to school, the teachers would ask, what's your favorite feature? And I would always write ears. And then they said, well, your smile's so beautiful, your eyes or your hair. And I'm like, not a lot of people get beauty of ears. But it's a real thing. You don't notice it so much unless you're on the other side, unless you hate your ears. But I don't know how much appreciation ears actually get until something goes wrong, right? It's like your toenail. You don't care that it's there until it's coming off. And then you're like, oh my, this is a tremendous pain in my life. It's very important to me. You know? Yeah.
I so appreciated when you were reading from the book that you read, your poet father. And I am a great lover of Audible books.
Yeah.
And have you ever thought of doing any audiobooks?
There are audiobooks of both of my books, and I did the recording for them. Because, when you're like the first doing something, how many times do people get to say Hmong words or Hmong names? And I didn't want it butchered. And so they sent me this selection of actors with beautiful voices to choose from. And my siblings are all like, You have such good choices. Nobody likes your voice. But I made a decision to do the audio book. So they're audible books of both the Song Poem and the Latehomecomer. In fact, both of them won awards for the reading. But I should tell you that I met this couple this past summer, and they were driving across the country. They were listening to the Song Poem, and they got into a car accident. They both ended up in the hospital because they were both crying too hard. But they said they didn't mind. And so they're working on the Latehomecomer. They're going to backtrack because they're going to go back across the country. But yeah, a lot of people listen to the books actually, particularly my blind audiences. That's how they reach the work.
Yeah.
And so they listen a lot. So it's an important part for me, a question of access, but also it's great training. You don't have to stand perfectly straight, sit perfectly straight to record it. For the first book, I went to this wonderful engineer's house in Hudson, Wisconsin to record for the space of 3 days. And I thought 3 days was short. For the Song Poem, I was at the Guthrie Theater for a day and a half.
Oh,
So you have to read the whole thing through several times, and you have to do it perfectly straight. I don't do yoga or anything,
Oh my gosh.
but that would help. I realized that at that moment, if I had better posture, it would have helped. It's a great feat of discipline.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And so yeah, they're both of you. Yes.
I'm wondering if you would just explain to us how it worked for you, like being a refugee, and then you said you were a permanent
Residential alien?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will you talk about that language a little?
Yeah. The process is really simple. There's a very, very careful screening process. For the Hmong, the American government wanted us live because the war was a secret war in America. It wasn't in the book. So then they didn't want to know that there'd been a secret army that they had fought and died in Laos. And so then everybody who who was going to come to America had to say that they had fought under American leadership. So my dad was just a boy during the war, but it didn't matter. You have to, the process forced the Hmong people to lie to come to America. When we all got to America, you have to take a loan before you come. So you're already in debt to the U.S. government. You have to buy one-way tickets to come to America. And so everybody then takes out these loans to come. When we get here, I don't know what the numbers are specifically for the refugees right now, but we all got $20 at the airport. And that was to buy food for the next few days. In our case, we didn't have to spend it because my uncle had gotten here earlier, so he planned a feast. But you come and they give you a little bit of money. For 4 of us, I think it was $80 per person for like the first several years in America. And that was it. We got housing support for 3 weeks, 3 months, that's it. Refugees get support for 3 months, and then after that, you're supposed to go on welfare or somehow make it on your own, whatever it takes. And that's why a lot of churches sponsor new refugees, because you can teach them English, you can take them shopping for the first time, all of this stuff. And then after, I think it was after 2 years, we had to go get our alien cards. We went to get ours. We were sponsored by the International Institute of Minnesota, and they just wrote me 3 days ago saying that they're giving me this award for my service to refugees, the International Institute of Minnesota. They're having this big gala at the International Market Fair, and last year they gave it to Ilhan Omar, and this year everybody voted, and I guess by a wide margin, they're all giving it to me. So I'm asking my mom and dad to go back with me. We haven't been back in a long time, so it's kind of moving when I think about it. But it's a pretty long process. But, it's easier to come here as refugees legally, right, than it is to come here as non-wealthy immigrants. Because at least you get those 3 months of support.
Do you still have family wanting to come here or waiting to come?
When the camps were closing in Thailand, all of my father's family came. My mom's family never made it out of Laos, so they're still in Laos. And so in Laos, the history is fundamentally different than it is here in America, right? Here in America, it's fundamentally different than it's in another place. And so, they live underneath a communist regime. And so there are things they don't say. They don't talk about the war. I met my eldest uncle, and he had really wise words for me. He said, Mena, the one thing I've learned about this war, there's the only thing he said about the war and about life. He says, if you're not willing to kill them, they win. It doesn't matter what they do. If you're not willing to kill them, they win. If you're not willing to hit them, they win. If you're not willing to yell at them, they win. So why be in a fight if you're not willing to do all of that? You know, and I never heard those words before. But that's a big lesson for me. Do they want to come to America? No, because America doesn't want them. America doesn't want any more refugees. Right now, we don't want any refugees, really. And so, politically, you know, like there's 9 Syrian families in Minnesota. I don't know if you know this, but they are the foundation of what will become, I think, a community. And we haven't had Syrian refugees here in the last 6 years because of administration.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not that we collectively, that there are people in power who don't want them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so a lot of the refugee resettlement agencies are losing people and closing. I believe Catholic Charities Lutheran Social Services just stopped their refugee division because there's no more funding. You know, and then Arise Ministries just let go of their executive director, my good friend Michelle, because there's no more funding. So all across the state and all across this nation, this is happening. So the book then is very lifetime. Because when I started it, Lutheran Social Services, Refugee Services, you know, I went to meet the director, everything, and now within the space of 1 year, there are no more. And so lots of things are changing very quickly. But Minnesota will always have refugees because they have us. Because somewhere along the way, all these, again, churches in Minnesota decided that they were up for the task. And so they took on refugees. And now refugees are taking on each other. Right? In a good way. Any final questions? Our time is up. And I want to make sure you all get plenty of time to go home safely. My little sister is here with books if anybody's interested. And I'm happy to sign. Thank you so much.
Thank you.